Julian, can I grab your head and give you a noogie?
Not today.
Thank you.
Of course. Hal, can I put both of my hands on your face and bring my forehead to touch yours?
Yes. Anna, can I put my arm around your shoulder and then say, I love that we're here together?
Yes.
I love that we're here together.
Me too. Julian, can I run at you really fast and then give you a really big hug?
Yes, absolutely.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Muprov Musings. This is episode number 17. I'm one of your hosts, Hal Munger, and joining me now on the line is your other host, Julian Bernardo.
Hey, everybody. I'm so glad to have you all hear me. And this is the first glasses episode. This is a time where I'm wearing my glasses, and I just want you all to know that that's what's going on. But maybe, that's not the most important thing happening right here in this moment, because we do have a very wonderful, a very special guest for this episode, one of our fellow improvisers from back in college. I'll let her introduce herself, though. Anna.
Hello. Hey, hi. I'm Anna. I'm a Stanford improviser right now and forever. Once a simp, always a simp, as they say. What's up? What I started doing improv during the pandemic when everyone was on Zoom all the time. And I did an improv workshop that was led by two Stanford improvisers. And it was awesome. Though when I actually fell in love with improv was during the audition. I was like, this is super cool. I actually am going to be devastated if I don't get into the group. And so fortunately I did, and joined the most wild Zoom prov quarter. It was a blast. It was a lot of fun. But yeah, that was, I don't know how many years ago now, 3 maybe. Still a member of Simps, though I'm graduating soon.
Ooh. So
is there anything else I should say about myself?
You can
Sometimes I do non-improv acting, but not often.
Okay.
But you're involved in the sort of theatery things going on campus, right?
That's true. Yeah. I'm leading theater lab on campus, which is experimental and contemporary theater, student theater.
Very fun. If you've read the title of this episode, you know that the focus is going to be on intimacy. So, as we try to invite people who might have something to say about each topic that we pick. None of us are intimacy coordinators, and we should disclaim this as early and as much as possible. We do not have any certification in directing intimacy in an improv space, let alone a theater space. Flip those around. But Anna, why do you think that we wanted you on for this episode?
That is a really wonderful question. Do I play the flirtiest characters on stage? Is that why I'm here? Who's to say? Well,
Hal, maybe you want to butt in, but Anna, I think that you are one of the improvisers who is comfortable with intimacy and has a lot of other theater experience that might inform some best practices with intimacy. And I think that you probably have a lot to say in this regard.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. Hal.
I just was going to agree.
Well, thank you for inviting me on. This is exciting. I think it's really interesting. I think intimacy coordination is super interesting, and especially coordination for improv, just because it's usually an intimacy choreographer is the name of the role, and you can't really choreograph things so much with improv unless, I don't know, potentially we can discuss that more. But I definitely think it's interesting with improv where you can't plan things in advance. Mm-hmm. So I've been thinking about it,
Nice.
Yeah. And this is another one of those like us suggesting things of I feel like anytime, if you've got an ensemble that's going for a while, it's great to have a practice that focuses on it. Especially if you're going to be doing shows and stuff like that. If you have a lot of practices, you like definitely spending one where you're like, all right, we're going to all learn each other's boundaries, practice. Because what I found is, after the practice, there were a lot of things that before the practice I wouldn't have felt comfortable with, but after the practice I did feel comfortable with, and I knew people's boundaries more, and it was just less awkward on stage. And it was fun.
Intimacy in improv is like not a very uniform thing. And as I understand it, most troupes don't really dedicate specific time to coming up with language or practicing it. So I cannot agree more that like if you actually intentionally set aside time for this, it could be very helpful. We're going to talk about our experience doing that. We did have a intimacy workshop that was led by someone more qualified than us. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about maybe the actual concrete things that we learned first.
Sure. Yeah. Anna, and you were also there in attendance at Marina's workshop, right? And this was Marina Johnson, someone who was running the Nightery, which was hosting a show, or which was hosting a theater that a new play was taking place in, volunteered to come in and run these workshops for us. We're very grateful to her for doing that. But Anna, you were there.
I was there.
Was there anything or what was your first reaction to sort of like having that more concrete approach to everything and like actually focusing and practicing?
Yeah, I sort of thought it's interesting when you talk about it in practice, because if you don't talk about it, you probably won't be doing it that much. And it seems like, why would you necessarily need to have intimacy in a show? But I think what was really interesting about, besides the fact that there's just intimacy in daily life, I thought the idea of just getting comfortable with platonic intimacy, like familial intimacy, friend intimacy, as opposed to just viewing it as being romantic or sexual intimacy, is definitely an approach that I think makes people's improv seem a lot more realistic, or make relationships seem more grounded, because generally with the people that we know and interact with on a regular basis, we have some degree of intimacy with them. And if you don't discuss intimacy before a show, sometimes you have sort of a distance between you and the other person. That is not really realistic, and that audiences maybe pick up on as being a lack of closeness. So I definitely think it's interesting to just practice like being close to people in a way that doesn't necessarily even need to be romantic.
Yeah, this is not like you practice intimacy so that you can do crazy like romantic or sexual things on stage, like learn new things to do. It's like practicing intimacy just to exist as people in the way that you normally would with people that you are familiar with. And that's something that we practiced a lot. And there's something more niche that I remember practicing in this workshop, which is worth mentioning, I think, which is we practiced a decent amount of intimacy for like scary purposes, or like, action or like, death, that kind of stuff. So the idea of intimacy is pretty broad in the improv context, at least as we're going to discuss it.
Yeah. And it's like also very different with this ensemble. Like you have to have an ensemble to do this. Anna mentioned falling in love with improv during the auditions, but that's the kind of place where you really see either auditions or jams or where people don't know each other. Like basically I feel like the go-to thing is just don't touch the other person at all that you're in a scene with. But our scenes, maybe if they're two siblings, one will go like sit down on top of the other person, or, eat the food that they're eating or whatever. Much closer. And were there any norms kind of that were set in the workshop that you felt like were helpful, but maybe not 100% intuitive? Like that they're like, oh, I wasn't expecting that to, or that was a smart way of putting that. I could start just with the idea of like getting someone from the outside to do it. I was the director of a new play, and I was thinking like, okay, I can run this. And one of the first things that was suggested to me is like, well, you're the director, you have a lot of like incentive to try to make things in the way that you want them to be. And it's nice to take that pressure away and bring in an outside person, especially also if I'm one of the if I do run an intimacy workshop, I won't participate in any of the action. But if we're like, okay, now we're going to try like kissing each other, it's easier if contextually that suggestion did not come from the person that you're kissing. It just feels, and when we say kissing, also we do stage kisses, and we weren't actually kissing on the mouth. We had our thumbs in between.
Yeah. I think that one of the interesting things from the workshop that we can talk about are the 5 C's that we learned.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just read them out right now, which are context, consent, communication, choreography, ? And closure. So these were 5 kind of pillars of doing intimacy on stage that Marina suggested to us as being important. Anna, do you have any kind of remembrance of any of these in particular that you have any thoughts about?
Well, as far as closure goes, I feel like tapping in and tapping out is always something that is important with any sort of intense scene where you sort of before a show or before a scene, you sort of look into the other person's eyes and you give them a little high five and acknowledge that you're about to do a scene that is not related at all to your actual relationship. And then when you're done, you do the same thing to sort of like close out that fake reality so it doesn't sort of become confusing or uncomfortable, right? It's just to keep it sort of in its place if you do something, any sort of intensity in a scene.
Yeah, I mean,
I always thought that was cool.
For sure, because improv is so like something that bleeds into our real life, and our real life bleeds into, we're just saying the things that come up to our mind. So yeah, it's very natural to let existing relationships influence how you improvise with people. But I totally thought that tapping in and out was a great way to try to differentiate it a bit.
Yeah, and when you say tapping in and out, again, what are we talking about exactly?
Yeah, I mean, just as Anna said, right? With the hands to each other, perhaps we can do this right here. You won't be able to see it, viewers, but 2 people might put their hands up and touch one another with each other's hands, look into their eyes, and what do we say?
It depends. I feel like sometimes people go, this is not real. This is the future thing. It's not going to be real.
Yeah.
I don't know. That seems like a little bit of a silly way of doing it.
I think sometimes. Go ahead.
Well, is that the closure that we're thinking of in this case? Is there other components of closure that you guys were thinking of discussing?
I think the one other side of it is just the debriefing and the checking in of like, this is not real. Also, like, was there anything throughout this process that felt uncomfortable or?
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I wanted to hit the context one because I love an improv when things split and everything's always doubled with the character versus improviser. And I feel like there's the big character context of like, okay, I might be comfortable with you putting your hand on my shoulder as a friend, but I might feel weird about it if you said something like super flirty while you put my hand on my shoulder or whatever. But there's also the improviser context of like who endowed it. I feel like if someone else endowed, like, oh, those 2 people are like so in love, they're all over each other, I would feel way more comfortable doing that with someone than being like, I'm starting the scene off and from a totally blank canvas, what I'm choosing to do is a bunch of sort of unrequired intimacy. It can feel weird sometimes, I think, to be the endower of that.
Yeah, because if you're practicing this, it's hard, and it's not entirely useful to just say what physical actions you're okay with, because context very well may influence what you feel comfortable with doing on stage.
Anna, I was wondering about that for you. Like, I feel like you're someone who's pretty comfortable initiating intimacy, and I was wondering how you sort of navigate that and like, because contextually as players? Do you feel like there are different people where like you feel more comfortable doing it with different players in the ensemble, or?
Yeah, I think especially with ensemble stuff, I feel like sometimes there are some people who I know they love being in silly, goofy, romantic relationships. And so I know that's fun for them. And so with those people in particular, I will sometimes initiate. I'll just start like flirting with them on stage just because I know that it's going to they'll enjoy the drama of figuring out that more complex relationship. The audience always loves it, but there definitely are some people, as far as like making sure your partner's having fun, I definitely think there are some people in the group who just really love having that sort of relationship with people on stage because it's funny, it's fun.
Yeah.
I think I probably do it less. It's a good question as far as like actually with people that I don't know as well. I think I probably would not initiate anything. I wouldn't necessarily endow anyone as being into me, I think. I would sort of like, it's true. Like it's sort of the same like rules of consent that follow in the normal world. Like you can sort of like lob something up and be like, thanks for coming on this date with me. But I wouldn't necessarily, I feel more comfortable not endowing them with how they feel about me. I just sort of endow how I feel about them. And if they can take that and run with it in any direction.
Yeah.
That's the sort of classic, like one of the classic heinous moves that you can make as an improviser. I feel like we've encountered some male improvisers in particular who really like to repeatedly endow people as being, and I have one of them, I guess I can say it because the class ended, but there was a guy in one of my classes recently who would like start many scenes of like, we're doing long form stuff and he'd be like, cut to right after, like, and the person would be on stage, he pointed them, arm around them, cut after, right after we just had sex. And I was like, why on earth would you ever...
Yeah, that's weird.
It's so weird, and you have no ability to stop it once it's happening in the scene without like block. I mean, I think it's worth it in that situation if you want to block. Just be like, I would just stop the scene because we're just in class. But
that's tough in particular because it's endowing you as having already consented and something already happened. That's really weird, actually.
It's so heinous. It's the same thing as endowing someone as like having a crush, and it's weird. And also like mainly with female improvisers, not with like I don't think I ever saw him well, I guess one time in the context of the three-way, but you know, it's heinous.
How many times did he do that?
It's heinous. It's I mean, I think it was okay in terms of, I think that some of the people in the class were excited by it and having fun with it, but I don't think that he had that data point before doing it. And when he did it, I was like, oh, that is
yeah, well, I think that this kind of transitions nicely into talking more generally about like, giving consent and receiving consent and asking for consent in this improv space, right? So obviously there's the stuff that we've talked about before that we should reiterate, which is before doing a show or something like that, it's very often a good idea to go through and do an intimacy circle and talk about specifically parts on your body that you don't want to be touched or situations that you don't want to be put into. But how do we think about this like during improv, and how do we like execute asking for and giving consent like while still on stage?
Yeah, well, I definitely, I feel like it's something that's not intuitive for some reason, or it wasn't for me, is that, in movies, people can sort of just have like large romantic kisses, but the media sort of moving towards encouraging consent being shown on screen more. And just like along those lines, like, asking, can I kiss you, instead of just kissing them. Along those lines, I think it's sometimes stressful. You're like, oh, I maybe know that this improviser is willing to kiss, but how will I know that they're, excited to actually stage kiss me in the moment in the scene? And in Simps, at least, we talked about your character can totally just ask for consent, at least with kissing, or anything else that's sort of like romantic. I guess if you're doing like a creepy slasher type thing, you wouldn't ask for consent, but you would talk about that beforehand. But as far as like romantic touch and intimacy goes, I think it's really cool just to have the improviser and the character can sort of both ask for consent at the same time in the moment. And the improviser, if the character can say no, if you say, "Can I kiss you?" the person can say no. Or I just learned this recently from Lisa Lynn, who came in to do a workshop. She directs Acapprov, which is acapella musical improv in London. She came to do a workshop with us. And just one thing that she mentioned sort of offhand was the character can say yes, but the improviser can say no if you're like, "Oh, let's, take this upstairs" or something. So just sort of giving them the chance to respond in a way that they feel comfortable in the moment, even though it is improv. It definitely, it's cool. It is super possible, and also encourages consent by depicting it on stage.
Yeah.
But again, you have to have trust in your partner. You can't have the partner who's going to be like, "Cut to upstairs" or whatever. Because there's
God.
I know. Yeah. Do you have anything in your toolkit for? Well, I guess that is one thing. But like, have you been in a situation where you were trying to block an offer that was being made on stage? I feel like Sims is so supportive about this kind of thing that is probably rarer. But
yeah, I don't think it's necessarily come up where I've tried to block something and someone kept going. But I mean, I do think to the extent that it's just a show, I think I would feel if anyone feels uncomfortable and they've tried to block, soft block, and it keeps going, I think prioritizing yourself over the show should be important. I think you could just stop the show. I think you could be like, say their real name and be like, "Stop," or like, I think you could be straightforward about it in a way that sort of could throw the show under the bus a tiny bit. Cause I mean, it's just one show. Whereas, I don't think, but that's just me. I don't think art should be elevated over people's health and well-being.
Something that comes to mind just in thinking about, what to do in a situation like this, that I don't know that I'm endorsing, but I think we can talk about is what the role of other people should be in this situation, right? Like, let's say you're in the wings and you see, cut
True.
to upstairs. It's my intuition that it might be a good idea to just go in and cut the scene if you're not involved in that situation.
Or enter like, "Oh, sorry, this room's full."
Yeah. And it does, like, the thing here is it does require you to, I guess, know your ensemble well enough where you can identify like, "Oh, wait, something is happening here that is not good," and you go in and cut. And there is a world where maybe both people were like, "Oh, wait, this was actually going to be fun," and you cut this. But I think that there could be some value as an ensemble to have everybody on board to maybe cut something if they think that it's maybe going in the wrong direction.
And
yeah, that makes sense.
Julian, you actually initiated, because we have this problem with auditions where at the beginning of auditions, we don't know who's going to show up or what they're going to do. And we always have some people who are on the wings to be directing and being able to say like, "New choice," or "Stop the scene," or whatever, make sure people are safe. But Julian also had us practice one year. One of us would pretend to be someone in the audition who is, it doesn't even have to be like sexually creepy, just doing something that was keeping us from seeing the other improviser, or and then someone would come in and practice sort of that aggressive, protective improvising where you're like endow reasons for the person to get off stage or to change the context of what's happening, and sort of protect the third improviser who is playing innocent, meek. "Oh no, bad thing is happening to me in my improv scene." That was a very fun and silly exercise that actually I felt like made me more confident about that kind of protective improv.
Yeah. Something else that comes to mind in this like area of communication and consent in improv is, I think often there are scenes that start where it's two people and I don't know that it should be, but one of the first questions that a lot of people are wondering as they're watching the scene is like, oh, are these two people together? Are they involved in a romantic relationship? And back and forth, you can give subtle hints in either direction. And I think that is a way to navigate this communication a little bit without even the audience maybe knowing, where you could say something like, oh, thank you for coming to dinner with me. And that's one hit, but then your partner may very well respond saying, oh no, I don't want this to be a romantic relationship, and push it in a slightly different direction. So I think that is also part of the whole consent apparatus, is starting with subtler hits and defining together what the actual relationship is.
Yeah. And for a new play, some of the things we were trying to do was have open the field to things that we couldn't otherwise do in improv. Like, okay, what happens if you start a scene where the two people are like already pretty far along in things, or one person's already dead, or like just any sort of crazy hit. And I think that it was really key that we, for that context, really ramped up the amount of sort of boundaries that we talked about before the show. And we're like, okay, these are the norms. Because again, it feels weird to initiate something like that if those aren't the norms being set by the group. If this is an individual going rogue and being like, I want to start this scene from zero context with like kissing you, that is universally strange. But if we're like, all right, let's try starting a scene this way, see how it works, and then it's kind of a tool in your tool belt. And I think that is where choreo comes in. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but I felt like it was very similar to learning a bunch of dance moves and then stringing them together in a dance, where it's like, we would do practice of like, okay, we're comfortable putting our hand on this person's knee, and we'd try it and practice. And then that's now a thing where if I put my hand on your knee, that that's okay. But then if I put my hand like a little bit lower on your shin or a little higher on your thigh, like those are not really things that we practiced. And so not incorporating those moves into the dance and sort of building up spots that are like familiar spots, so that it doesn't feel like you're initiating anything new during a show.
Yeah. Dichotomy alert. I'm going to introduce a dichotomy here. And Anna, I want to see how you feel about this, which is, how do you feel different doing intimacy in improv in scenes that are largely goofy or comedic versus scenes that are more like dramatic or serious or emotional, perhaps?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm trying to think. I guess I have done some goofy intimacy with. I guess it's just when the relationship is sort of less deep, and it is just more like big talk with like less action, I guess. Like recently, I was playing for our improvised elections show. This was a quick endowment, but it was silly and low stakes. So I do think like even if this relationship on paper is one that's romantic, it doesn't really necessarily need to set the actual level of intimacy between two people. But I was like an evil, dolphin person, as one is in an improv show. But, my husband, we were like sort of an evil couple that was super into each other, and we're like trying to win the election for our evil plans. So that was I'm trying to think of like comparing that to the more, grounded physical intimacy that comes with emotional intimacy. I guess the difference, it feels, it's kind of about vulnerability, I guess. So I think things are more vulnerable when you're quieter, closer together, slower. We talked about that in the intimacy workshop as well, like the speed at which you touch someone and the pressure like matters as much as like the fact that you're touching them. So I guess sort of the context of intimacy in serious scenes is definitely more vulnerable. So I can see how people would be less comfortable playing that, but also it's maybe more intentional. I feel like then you're going for realism and you're really paying attention to the relationship being grounded instead of paying attention to, what's getting laughs or what's super fun, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, yeah, I personally think that doing the more grounded intimacy is a lot harder than doing the kind of more goofy, over the top intimacy.
Yeah, I agree.
A lot of the times we back when we were in college, we did a show that was based on The Bachelor, and that was a show where there was intimacy, and maybe sometimes we had some grounded moments, but a lot of the times that I did it, very over the top. It's like a French chef who's making out with like secretly Bigfoot or something. So it's clearly like a higher, over the top kind of situation, and I found that relatively approachable. But like an over the top like stage kiss and like makeouts, I find that to be easier than if maybe I'm sitting next to another improviser in a more grounded scene and I just have to put my head on their shoulder. Like, I think that the slow and the soft is kind of hard. And I think the slow and the soft, is maybe less present more generally in the improv scape. But as we hope to with Muprov, I think that is more in the wheelhouse of the things that we are able to achieve. So that's my take on it. What do you think, Hal?
Yeah, for me, that improviser context ramps up a lot. With the goofy stuff, I feel like I am pretty comfortable doing that with most people in the ensemble. And with the slower, more realistic stuff, that narrows down to a much smaller group of people that I would feel comfortable initiating that or doing that. Unless I could obviously broaden that by practicing more with a wider group of people. But I think gender also plays into it as well. And it sort of depends on the different people. Julian, I think I lean more towards intimacy in scenes that you're in because I feel very comfortable in our external to improv relationship, not like having any sort of tension in that regard. And then also I really feel like I know your boundaries, and I also know that you'll enjoy it and have fun with it. And so that relaxes all of my anxieties about like, whoa, this is a lot of going on. But for each person, there's kind of a different thing to navigate because all these people outside of it, and it's strange.
Yeah, and let's dive deeper into this whole context, and jumping off of you saying you feel more comfortable doing intimacy scenes with me. Anna, you had some interesting things to say before this, before we started recording, about how intimacy and the acts on stage can get a little bit strange when there are, for example, people who are actually in a relationship, and let's say they actually kissed on stage or something. How do you feel like that plays into this whole apparatus?
Yeah, it's a good question. So this was also from Lisa Lynn of Acaprov London. But it was something that people in our group hadn't super considered up until that point, because we do have some people in the group who were dating, and in that case, technically it is kind of also fun and sort of an Easter egg for the audience members if they know the two people are dating, to see them like actually kiss, for instance, instead of stage kiss, which I think can be fun. But also the point that Lisa made that I thought was super interesting is if two people, given that the audience doesn't all necessarily know what people's relationships are with each other, if two people have a relationship where they're comfortable actually kissing each other for real, or doing other things that are sort of like beyond the scope of what would normally happen in that particular ensemble, it sort of puts pressure on other improvisers to match that reality. The same way that if you like were using a real phone and then someone else used a space object phone, it would be a little bit of a blip in the reality of the scene. So like if there's one couple that's kissing for real and the other couple, you would kind of assume, like in a movie, for instance, if there's one couple that was kissing, you would assume probably it's rated PG-13, and that means there's going to be other kissing or something by the other couples. So again, I think that's not it shouldn't hugely determine what everyone's doing, because I think it's improv. Audiences are going to understand that there's a difference in, who's doing what. But it was an interesting thing to think about, is that potentially if people have a romantic relationship outside of the show and they're, kissing for real, the other improvisers stage kissing might it might put a little pressure on the other improvisers to, stage kiss if they didn't want to, or it might seem weird that they're just stage kissing. Although I don't know if we've encountered that necessarily in the group. But I think.
I was just can you really tell them apart? I feel like
I was going to say, it is hard. You got to put your hand there. It's hard to tell if they're kissing or not.
One thing that to get at this comes to mind as you're speaking is, I think that the role or the format of the show might play a pretty big role here. Like, if we did Bachelor, for example, and they're the bachelor and one of the contestants did a real kiss because they're together in real life, that's a case where I think it feels maybe weirder for the other people, because that's a format where kind of everybody is in an equal role, all the contestants at least, as compared to if it's maybe just a generic long form narrative and two people kiss, then I think there's less expectation placed on the others that it's going to be similar. So yeah, if you're doing a format where there's like pre-set relationships, maybe the real kisses are a worse idea because it adds some asymmetry, but maybe in more asymmetric formats, it makes more sense. That's just my read though.
One thing that I remember in particular as being a moment where I the thing is, it didn't bother me, but I did feel like, we should probably be stage kissing because someone else is like we've done Shakespeare shows where they end with a wedding.
Yes.
And, if there's like 3 couples lined up on stage getting married at the end, and then one of them stage kisses, it sort of feels like, all the couples are supposed to stage kiss right now. Mm-hmm. That was one moment that I sort of felt like sort of the stage kissing put pressure on other people to also stage kiss just based on that moment. I don't know how you would avoid that necessarily, besides potentially just leaning into the actual relationship that your characters had beforehand and realizing that, you don't need to tie things up with a little stage kiss bow at the end just because everyone's getting married.
Yeah.
Like one of the things that is, there's the concept of like equally attractive non-alcoholic beverages of like, okay, if you're not trying to put pressure on people to drink, you can have, like, rather than just have water, you can have something really great, like a cool kind of juice that's non-alcoholic, that is like, and I think that approaching intimacy workshops with a similar thing of like, rather than being like, all right, now we're getting to the part where only the people who feel comfortable with this are practicing these things. It's like, what are some really fun workarounds that we can do for the people who don't want to stage kiss or don't want to like touch their partners as much and don't feel comfortable with these things in this way, and making them hopefully so fun that the other people kind of want to do them as well. And like, maybe one couple kisses and then the other one does like a deep like tango dip or something like that, and it's physical and it looks cool, or they do like a little dance move, or any number of substitutes. Or people always talk about the just like maybe slow, like lean in like you're gonna kiss, then the lights go out, or any number of,
or spitting them around. That's a classic with like middle school plays where you like your back is facing the audience.
Put a finger on the person's lips. I mean, that honestly is more intimate in some ways than
well, we're talking about this like kisses and the payoff and stuff. Makes me think of when we have practiced Bachelor, and I'm bringing this up a lot because this is one of the formats where in the past we had kind of focused on intimacy because it's like prescribed to be relatively intimate. But when we were practicing Bachelor, one of the things that I remember Lisa Rowland, one of our teachers, saying is that all of the tension or all of the interest for the audience is in the pre-kiss, in all of the moments leading up to the kiss. So just as you say, how like we can just cut before the kiss actually happens, playing with the pre-kiss can be a fun way if you're comfortable with maybe doing that and you don't want to do a stage kiss, or if there's 2 people who actually kiss in the show, that's their spectacle, but maybe 2 other people who aren't going to actually kiss can play with this like pre-kiss and building up to it. And that can be their little spectacle that they give to the audience.
Yeah.
And that's, again, but I honestly think that's harder than the actual, I guess it depends on your boundaries, but I would say the pre-kiss, I remember in Bachelor, I'm realizing that's another qualification is I did artistic direct bachelor once.
Oh, yeah.
It's not just that I play 30 characters. But yeah, the concept of, taking a really long time to like gaze into their eyes, I always found that very difficult to do.
Yeah.
And I mean, the audience loves it though. It's a great point. That is something that we were told to do. And I think people didn't end up doing it as much as we could have, just because it is so difficult, I think, to sort of really pause and have that moment of tension with someone instead of just sort of like relieving the tension and moving on.
Yeah. And the audience is it makes consent a lot harder, like just in theater in general. Part of why people are getting, but especially in improv, it's not really consent if you have a cheering audience going like kiss, like there's so much pressure there. If you're like, okay, I guess so you definitely want to before set those boundaries. But the flip side is also true where you can really play with them by they'll get invested in that kind of thing and you can delay it, might get a bigger reaction out of the audience than the real.
Yeah, I think we should talk a little bit more about the audience. That is such a like unique thing to doing, live improv on stage is it's not just you and your partner that you have to, figure out consent with. It's this whole audience that's standing there, sitting there and maybe making noises and whatnot. So do people have experience of times where the audience like encouraged intimacy or just generally times where having the audience there kind of changed what happened on stage? Because I totally feel like that happens, especially, while we're on this bachelor topic, anytime that there is like a flirtatious remark, I think, or some indication that something might happen, I think there often is like an ooh out of the audience that applies to you. How do you guys feel about that?
And sometimes, like Hal was saying, if a third character endows two people as being in a relationship, it's more okay. I sometimes feel like the audience, you say something that's not meant to be romantic, but the audience takes it one way. And if they make the ooh sound, that's sort of like them endowing you as being in a relationship. Because then they're all sort of on the same, like just that noise and like general recognition sort of is hard to block as an improviser.
Yeah.
And having a lighting improviser, because I was a big fan. If you have lights with colors, the lighting improviser can turn the stage pink whenever they want, or like a light hit pink. And then again, that having a third party who's like, no, you're not seeing this. That like in this context, these two characters. But what about the experience? I feel like of having either like family members in the audience or like significant others in the audience, like how that changes the dynamic.
I don't know. How do you guys feel about my parents are generally just like, wow, that was great job. But I think potentially I would avoid more, what's the word, provocative scenes if they're watching. It's a good point.
Yeah. The audience, they are there. Even as much as we try to improvise and be in the spaces we are, the audience is there. Also, another person who can throw a wrench into this whole thing, musical improviser. I feel like I can recall multiple times where a musical improviser, I don't know the terminology for it, but played a lovely or romantic little ditty. And it's like, okay, that's what's happening.
Or Steven with the slide whistle coming in with a
yeah. Oh yeah.
It's a classic.
Totally. So it's a very funny apparatus we have here with consent and intimacy and improv, where we have like over 100 maybe people or options for endowing it and working with it.
And I think, Stanford has the Gaieties show, which I feel like is the most interesting way that they interact with audience.
Yeah.
Interactions is, for context, it's a scripted show, but on the last night of the show / kind of other nights, the audience will just start chanting "make out" at any two characters who get within like a foot of each other. And I actually think they've done it better in the past. They've dealt with it better in the past. I went this year, and if two, beforehand they all talk about like to each other about who's willing to do what, and they have a way of checking with each other on stage. But in the past, actually, I think people have agreed on something that they do instead of kissing, like you guys were saying, like the kind of payoff thing, like they'd do a handshake or they'd hug or they'd high five, which also sort of acknowledges to the audience, like, stop chanting, this is what our payoff is. And then they made an announcement before the show, like, people have, the actors have preset what they're comfortable with doing. So if you're chanting make out and they, high five, please cheer as loudly as if they had actually kissed. Which I thought was nice, because people just like being able to impact what's happening on stage and like knowing that the actors can hear them, I think, more so than, and this is not improv, but it's sort of like an improvised aspect of gaieties. Yeah. And people just love chanting something, have that impact on stage, and then getting to cheer. Whereas this year, I think if people didn't want to kiss, they sort of stood there awkwardly, or they just stood there and didn't respond, and so people didn't know to stop chanting. I do think, like, sort of, it's possible to say beforehand, if you know that the audience is going to be rowdy or whatever, to sort of give a message beforehand about consent, like, the actors have their own boundaries, and please, like, celebrate them listening to you if they listen to you in any way that they end up making that happen.
Yeah.
Go. Please go. Please.
Mine was just like, this is all very, I feel like, college-y centric, in that we're the shows that you were talking about and like having college age audiences. But I think that also that influences the way we play, where we're often telling stories about younger people, where maybe the payoff is like this big romantic moment leading up to some sort of kiss at the end of the show. And that is this great, like, heightened moment. The audience goes crazy, whatever. But I was wondering, for Julian, getting into the world of improvising with adults, how you feel like, and also just if you've seen stuff at different theaters, how you think that changes. Because it definitely is a marked difference, I feel like, in terms of what
So I'll say right here, I'm not trying to flame older improvisers in any way or anything like that, but I do think, as we stated before, that there is just less of a culture of talking about it in the older improvising generations. For example, like, I do think that it is quite common for older improvisers to just straight up smooch, relationship or not, on stage. And it is my read that there is kind of less talking that goes into that. So certainly I can imagine that if you have a troupe and you have people who already play in this way, it might be hard to try to implement some of these things, or it just might not read as important to them. So I don't know that there's a solution there, but just a truth.
Well, also, what about age differences among
I was going to bring that up, yeah.
Yeah, because I feel like another big thing is, and I was listening to a podcast recently that was on the other side of this, talking about, like, older improvisers who are like, it's so frustrating, I never get down in romantic relationships. Yeah. But there definitely are some old men who come in like, who's the youngest girl in this group, and it's kind of heinous. It falls into that category. Anna, what were you going to say in terms of?
Yeah, I've talked to a couple people who were older improvisers who have wanted to join groups with younger people, or have been in groups with younger people, and they were self-conscious about it, less so frustrated actually that they were not getting endowed in romantic situations, and I think more so concerned about whether or not they could endow a romantic situation, or if that would be weird with someone who's 30 years old but still 30 years younger than you. It is interesting. I guess you have to build up an ensemble dynamic, but at least the improv that I've seen the improv that I've seen in mixed age groups, where, again, the lowest age may be like 25, but it goes up to like 65 kind of thing. I've actually seen like less, stage kissing and more like potentially sexual innuendos and stuff, but that's sort of like which again was short form. So that the improv that I saw, so potentially was not really developing like long relationships that would necessarily, lead improvisers to think that it was worth kissing. But I actually saw people sort of just avoid that, and they would put each other in romantic situations, but it would, at least again, that's just short form, but it would not be as deep. Like it would be like, oh, we're in this relationship, but it wouldn't be, you know, they're holding hands and gazing into each other's eyes. But that could just be a you know, because it's short form. I don't know. What do you guys think?
No, I think you're spitting that there is often I think there is more like sexual innuendo that I've seen in older ensembles. And it's a funny thing for me to think about right now because I am in a mixed age ensemble and I am the youngest person. So yeah, we'll see how it plays out for me.
Yeah.
But I'm also like directing, so it's, I don't know, there's interesting layers to it.
Do you
Okay.
I was gonna say, Julian, do you endow romantic relationships ever with people in your group, or has that not come up yet?
It hasn't really come up yet. I don't think I've endowed. I've been endowed as being in a romantic relationship with people. We're doing Hero's Journey, so it's like not as like pivotal, or it's not like maybe sometimes as like realistic and close to our reality, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think part of this is like the talk about it thing of like I think it's super valid to be like, I have a boundary. I don't want to do so much intimacy with this person. But I think having a forum to express that and to actually have that happen is really important. And it really frustrates me when people are inconsistently like endowing relationships more with some players than the other for a reason that's not like, oh, I feel more comfortable with these players, and particularly with the sexuality thing. Like, I feel like especially, I think short form is maybe a slightly different story, but if you're a long form improviser, all of your characters should be bisexual. And I think that there's an argument for no if you're trying to make a show about sexuality, or there's like, but basically you just need that flexibility of the story arc of like any of these characters might fall in love, because love is a central theme in most plots. And there are so many people in the improv world who just only play in straight relationships and like will even sometimes endow their male improviser as a female character.
Yeah, I see that.
Just to avoid and I don't know, it feels very cursed to me. And I get the other side of like, I don't feel comfortable playing this thing that I don't have the experience of if I'm straight, but it puts an undue burden onto the people of the opposite gender in your group to always be your romantic interests.
And it gets, I mean, I was in a scene where just notoriously it was with people not from our ensemble. Just everyone was getting, their genders were just getting flipped mid scene so that every relationship would be heterosexual. It was actually really funny. But you know, it was like, oh, it's two girls, so one of them's the husband. Oh, but then there's the husband is having an affair, but it's with a man. So then all of a sudden I'm a girl having an affair with, you know, cheating on my wife, who I am her husband. It was definitely it starts to be all these sort of mental gymnastics to try and make things. It seems more complicated than just sort of playing your own gender, unless you're trying to, you know, work with gender dynamics is something that you're like actually trying to focus on. And it's easier to just be yourself.
You know, we're having a wonderful, important conversation right now about identity and how this intersects with intimacy. But I have to just make sure we get in a little bit of talk about something that I personally like. And we sort of mentioned earlier, we've talked all about this, you know, romantic intimacy, but we have a wonderful opportunity where both of you were part of a slasher show that I directed, I believe last year, where we did have to think and talk about physical intimacy in the scary way, and how that plays out differently. I would say that I feel that physical intimacy in that space, I don't know. I was about to say something, but I'll ask it as a question. Do you guys think that physical intimacy in that space bears more similarity to the kind of goofy, over the top physical intimacy that you might find in something like The Bachelor, or the slower, softer intimacy you might find in a grounded scene where two people are in a relationship?
I think it's totally different. I think it's totally different. Partly because there's the added thing of like, people's life experiences. And I think anytime where you're mixing intimacy and violence is already getting into very sketchy territory in terms of what players might be comfortable with. And I think it's whatever people's boundaries are increasingly valid in a situation where things might be triggering or like scary. And I myself am I play scary very, very well. I can make myself into very scary characters. And there were multiple people in the ensemble who were like, my boundaries are, if someone else who's going to be a goofier slasher wants to endow like some creepiness, that's fine. But Hal, if you're the slasher and you're being as scary as you get, like and we had a word called slithering for being like sort of coming up behind someone and sort of putting your hands on their shoulders and just like saying creepy things quietly to them, even if they're not sexual. And there were multiple people who said that they did not want to be slithered on by a male member of the cast, which is a super, I think it was a very good boundary to set.
Yeah. And also just to sort of touch on the creepiness, intimacy, what we did in Simps at least is we, in the slashers, no slasher would have any sort of sexual motivation or anything. So it was not the creepiness, just to avoid, because there's no reason that would make anyone feel good, is we avoided the combination of actually like violence and sexual and romantic intimacy. So it was very much when we use the word intimacy, I think in this case, correct me if I'm wrong, but at least with the Simps, what we did is that's like closeness, touching, tension, that sort of thing, but nothing actually romantic or sexual in the slashers, unless it was between like, two characters in the slasher who are like, both trying to survive. But we would not combine creepiness just to avoid people being uncomfortable.
Yeah. So it was asexual slithering that people were like, just the sort of coming around behind and I don't know, just in general, being touched by someone that you can't see, even if it's not a sexual touch, can be pretty jarring, especially if they're a creepy murderer who's speaking in a creepy way.
And because it does get creepier. It gets the normal things that would not be that creepy if it gets significantly less or more uncomfortable as an improviser, I think, like to receive like a creepy like back massage by like a creepy old woman who's about to kill you kind of thing like that. We that was one thing that we practiced was like in our intimacy workshop for the slashers, is things that might feel normal or comfortable even in like a romantic or platonic situation, depending on the vibes, could feel so uncomfortable, like so deeply uncomfortable if it's in the context of a slasher. So yeah, it was definitely important for us to try everything out ahead of time, because I think that was another thing is people didn't really, not to take us on a tangent, but people didn't really know what they would be comfortable with or what they wouldn't be comfortable with. Yeah. So we had to do some trying in a really low stakes way where you could be like, oh, stop, I actually hate that, when it's not in a show, to figure out like what your boundaries are in a slasher.
Yeah. So even if this is a case where context is vital, right? Even if you are a boss ensemble in terms of this romantic and grounded intimacy, if you end up having to do physical intimacy in a scary setting, it's another time to reset. And I had a lot of fun in those early practices, just doing some exploratory work. What do people feel comfortable with? And, combining that with what looks interesting, what is scary. I think that thinking about the dichotomy within scary improv, it really can go both ways. A lot of horror improv that I've seen is quite over the top. Someone has like a goofy weapon that they're going to stab someone with, and there's a very big like and hand movements and whatnot. But in the show that we're talking about now, I think that there were a lot of moments where just like two potential romantic interests are in a room together alone, there was a slasher and a potential victim to murder in that room with them, and you can do similar stuff to the pre-kiss of building up to the kill, and that was in that, I think, softer, slower way of doing intimacy that I think is harder.
Yeah, and this is gonna sound slightly bad, but like I think that finding boundaries is like helpful in both ends of the spectrum of like I think at the beginning it actually would have been hard for any of us to really cross each other's boundaries. And then as we got better at getting scarier, then we started to be like, oh no, that was scary for me as an improviser. And but hitting those places with people and be like, okay, I don't do that thing with that person. But then I'd be like, oh, Julian, like I'm gonna come up and like run my hand down your cheek and like find those sort of scary because one of the things that's fun about doing horror improv is that it's easier to act in if you're genuinely like have a little bit of like, whoa, if I didn't know this was fake, this would be really scary.
Yeah. Those are always wild moments. Yeah, when the slasher is behind you and you can't look behind you because they're there.
And they can just make a noise like, ah! And that was another boundary of like, are you comfortable with actually being jump scared by someone who's behind you? I mean, this is getting farther and farther from the realm of intimacy, but it still is another.
It's all about, setting boundaries and figuring out what you're comfortable with ahead of time. Because also in practice, even if you are, like, you could for yourself, there's some things that are totally off limits. And sorry, I don't know if my audio just changed.
It did, but you're good.
I don't know if there's like some things that are totally off limits. Like in that case, you would not want to practice crossing boundaries per se. But again, it really is, if you do really feel safe with the ensemble, I felt like that was a really interesting just to find out what your boundaries are.
Yeah.
In a really, really safe space, like where it's practice, there's no pressure, you trust the person, if you're like, oh, like it's totally okay to be like, wow, I'm scared right now, and then the person can stop. Yeah, it definitely is an interesting. I thought the slasher intimacy workshop was just super, super interesting.
Well, this podcast is a backpack, and I tried to jam that last binder in to talk about slasher. We are hitting probably the end here, but I do want to leave it open for any final topics on intimacy that any of us wanted to hit before we wrap.
I wanted to hit just I know we've talked about this in previous episodes, but just a little more detail into the idea of before every show that we do this circle where we go around, and specifically the language of kind of red, yellow, and green, of like the green parts of my body you can pretty much touch in most contexts, and I'm pretty much every context I would be pretty fine with you touching them, besides a context that I'm just not comfortable playing in. And then the yellow parts of my body are like, get consent on stage in character if you want to touch these things, and it has to be a reasonable context. It can't just be out of the blue. And then the red parts are like, no context on stage no matter what, even if you're endowed as being Dr. Butt Toucher or something like that. I don't want you to touch my butt. And don't endow people as that anyway. But
the Dr. Butt Toucher incident of 2017.
Yeah, that kind of speeds up the process of like, here are my greens, point, point, point. Here are my yellows, point, point, point. Here are my reds. I'm okay with stage kisses, not okay with combat or stuff like that.
Yeah, that's vital. Anna, did you have any other intimacy related thoughts before we start to wrap?
Yeah, I guess just that every ensemble is different. So I think just having these conversations, like we've had a lot of these conversations, and so we have our own opinions on them. But I think having a conversation with the people that you're playing with, you can sort of, coming from that angle and just being like really willing to accept people's boundaries. One thing is, people sometimes communicate very specific boundaries, and everyone just needs to accept those and not question it. I think just making a space where people feel comfortable saying, because sometimes like you want enthusiastic consent. I think sometimes if there's a chance that people could say, oh, I'm like fine with stage kissing just because everyone else is doing it. Mm-hmm. So definitely really building trust and like comfortability, so that people really feel safe communicating their boundaries, I think. But like, yeah, just talking about it, I feel like makes it easier. So yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, one more with that. We had it in the opening, but the The not today was a big part of the workshop.
Oh yeah,
that
classic.
Which is that it's sometimes awkward to someone's like, hey, can I try doing this thing with you? And it's sometimes awkward to be like, no, especially if you feel different ways about particular things. So for all the workshops where we were practicing trying, first of all, we'd be building up of like, okay, try touching your arm. Then people who want to maybe try stage kissing, like that kind of build up. But also to have practice saying no and be like, all right, if for this round, everyone's going to say no. And then for this round, we're going around, do 3 things and say no to one of them.
Yeah.
And then the not today was it sometimes feels better to say no in a way that's fun and silly rather than to be like, we're having fun. No, I'm stopping it. And that was putting both your hands in an X and going, not today. So the person's like, oh, can we kiss? Not today. It's just way more fun for everyone involved than like, also having the alternative of like, I don't want to kiss you, but I do want to high five you.
Both of those. Right, like having those conversations about how to block in a way, because it is somewhat of a block, and improvisers are told not to hard block each other. But in situations like that, like you can talk ahead of time about ways to sort of redirect without being like, well, you could do no, but just being able to like sort of handle those situations in a way that people don't feel like it's going to make things awkward or mess up the scene. That makes sense.
There's a concept of like the diamond block, which is like the hardest possible block. But I feel like there's a kind of diamond block for improv of like, you're about to kiss and then suddenly like the whole ground shakes and you fall to the ground. You're like, there's an earthquake, or like, there's some kind of giant plot event coming in of like the roof being ripped off and aliens coming down to get you. And like, all right, well, this is way more epic than whatever kiss was going to, happen in this scene.
Yeah, you can always endow an alien invasion and they'll forget about the kiss. Something crazier is happening now.
Wait, do you know my first stage kiss? No one ever taught me how to stage kiss. Like we didn't go over it as a group. And so we just sort of knew that stage kissing was a thing. And it was me and Lana, and we were doing a tiny show, and we were, an older couple, and someone was about to fall off of a cruise ship, and we had never done it before. And so it was so deeply awkward because we both went in, like we both like had our thumbs. Anyways, there were 2 layers of thumbs. So another thing is make sure people know how to stage kiss.
And that's a choreography. Anything you do on stage, you should practice in a practice. Because I agree. I totally have done the thing where you put your hands on the other person's face and your thumbs are together. And at the last moment, you put them together on their lips and you kiss your own thumbs. Is how we do stage kisses. It looks pretty good. But if you're not thinking about it, you can put your thumbs on your own lips and then lean in with like a little star-nosed mole situation coming towards the other person's face. And I feel like I've done that before, maybe in front of an audience. So don't. And there are some people also who consent to, they're okay doing kisses that they initiated, but not doing the other. And Danya famously is okay with the other way around, where she's like, I don't know how to do a stage kiss. It's confusing. I don't want to mess it up. If you want to do it to me, that's okay, but I'm not gonna try that.
Oh crap, guys! I think that there's an alien invasion happening, so we have to end the podcast.
Wait, I was about to kiss Hal.
But I think we have enough time before the aliens get here, if I calculated it correctly, to first say thank you, Anna, for coming on today. This has been a very fun episode. We were very, very lucky to get you. And we're glad that you donated your time, your voice, and your thoughts to us as a final gift from us, because we are very kind hosts. We're going to give you just a moment to say whatever you want. This can be plugging something that you think is interesting. This can be a great wisdom about improv that you want to share. It can really be anything. But you're on the soapbox now, and you get to say whatever you want.
Oh my gosh. Okay, well, first of all, thank you for having me on. This is exciting. This is thrilling. Wow. Do I have anything I want to say? Gosh.
A show coming up?
We do have a show coming up. Oh, yeah. When is this episode coming out? Is it coming
Monday.
out before? Monday. Okay, well, if you're in the area, we have shows Improvised Fang and Tooth Tavern. Very fun, very grounded relationships from spectacular, monstrous creatures. And those are happening Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, December 7th, 8th, and 9th. You can look at Stanford Improv on Instagram if you're interested. And yeah, gosh. Yes, and.
Yes,
I
and.
don't have anything else to say.
Well, that's great. That's a great plug.
In that case, this has been Muprov
Musings.
So my sign off is that me and Priscilla from Simps have just started making an insane TikTok series called Priscilla Fights, where Priscilla's just sitting around living her life, doing a sketch comedy maybe. And then every time the video is interrupted by me coming in and fighting her. And then we have our choreographed stage combat. And it leaves you with, it's going to be a series, and it will leave you with a lot of questions like, who is Priscilla Fights?
Why is she fighting?
Why is she always getting attacked by the same person? Why does she always win?
Why is the other person stupid enough to come fighting every time?
Why is the other person always coming for her? What do they want?
Where can you find it?
We're gonna look up Priscilla Fights on TikTok. We're making our TikTok account now. We filmed the first video already.
Nice.
It's gonna be so good.
How did you ideate this?
That's a really good question. I actually have genuinely no idea. I don't remember. We were sitting at Tap, sort of just eating after practice. It was after Sims practice. We went to Tap and we were just talking about different little small projects that would be fun to do. And then we were talking about how fun it would be if there was like a really mid comedy sketch happening like for TikTok. And you're like, oh, this is kind of unfun. But then all of a sudden someone comes in and like tries to punch her in the face and she catches their fist and then she beats them up. So that's the premise.
Oh, I love that. That makes me happy and delighted. And I want to go watch it now.
Yeah. I'll send you guys episode 1.
We should have had Priscilla on in the combat episode. We didn't know.
Yeah, we should do a really mid podcast and then halfway through.
Turn it into combat.
Yeah.
That's perfect. So then Priscilla Fights. Just check us out.
Hell yeah.
It's going to be our pathway to fame. You might not know it now, but
you know that they're going to actually try to make you fight, right? Once you have 16 billion followers, there's going to be a sanctioned fight, or no?
Well, we're for sure going to get better at fighting as the videos go on, better at filming it, better at realistic looking fighting. And so slowly everyone's going to start thinking to themselves, are they fighting for real? What is this? And then about that time is when Priscilla for the first time will grab the person who's attacking her and go, what do you want?
Oh my God, dude, the arc here.
Yeah, there's going to be a really intense plot and it's going to be a huge payoff.
Anna, you already are on your path to fame because you're on Muprov Musings.
Yeah. Fame. We actually have the 6 most it Swedes watching this podcast. So if you want to get in with the most Swede,
they stopped listening.
They stopped watching?
No, we got one Swede last week and then the Swede stopped listening.
Gosh, what was your episode last week?
They didn't like the commedia.
They hate
They wish we did Spjorken del Arte, which is, they're ancient.
Don't make fun of them. They're my favorite.
They are.
Yeah, they're your audience, Julian. So
okay, the one who is still listening, I'm sorry about what I said. To the others, well, that's probably it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, guys, look what I got for Black Friday. Look what I got for Black Friday.
Can't you see me now? Like you always did. Can't you see me now? I just wanna be with you. When the times they seem so crazy, can't you see me now? Can't you see me now? See me now. Can't you see me now? I remember way back when, oh, and times they are changing, you know, things are rearranging. Can't you see me now? Can't you see me now? Everything is changing. Can't you see me now? Can't you see me now?